Chapter 24, The Butchering at Wounded Knee. That evening before it happened, I went into Pine Ridge and heard these things. And while I was there, soldiers started where the Bigfoots were. These made about 500 soldiers that were there next morning. When I saw them starting, I felt that something terrible was going to happen. That night I could hardly sleep at all. I walked around most of the night. In the morning, I went out after my horses, and while I was out, I heard shooting off toward the east, and I knew from the sound that it must be wagon guns, cannon, going off. The sound went right through my body, and I felt that something terrible would happen. When I reached camp with the horses, a man rode up to me and said, Hey, the people that are coming are fired on. I know it. I saddled up my buckskin and put on my sacred shirt. It was one I had made to be worn by no one but myself. I had a spotted eagle outstretched on the back of it, and the daybreak star was on the left shoulder because when facing south, that shoulder is toward the east. Across the breast, from the left shoulder to the right hip, was the flaming rainbow, and there was another rainbow around the neck, like a necklace, with the star at the bottom. At each shoulder, elbow, and wrist was an eagle feather, and over the whole shirt were red streaks of lightning. You will see that this was from my great vision, and you will know how it protected me that day. I painted my face all red, and in my hair I put one eagle feather for the one above. It did not take me long to get ready, for I could still hear the shooting over there. I started out alone on the old road that ran across the hills to Wounded Knee. I had no gun. I carried only the sacred bow of the west that I had seen in my great vision. I had gone only a little way when a band of young men came galloping up after me. The first two who came were Love's War and Iron Wazichu. I asked what they were going to do, and they said they were just going to see where the shooting was. Then others were coming up, and some older men. We rode fast, and there were about 20 of us now. The shooting was getting louder. A horseback from over there came galloping very fast towards us, saying, Hey, they have murdered them. Then he whipped his horse and rode away faster toward Pine Ridge. In a little while, we had come to the top of the ridge, where, looking to the east, you can see for the first time the monument and the burying ground on the little hill where the church is. That is where the terrible thing started. Just south of the burying ground on the little hill, a deep, dry gulch runs about east and west, very crooked, and it rises westward to nearly the top of the ridge where we were. It had no name, but the Wazichus sometimes call it Battle Creek now. We stopped on the ridge not far from the head of the dry gulch. Wagon guns were still going off over there on the little hill, and they were going off again where they hit along the gulch. There was much shooting down yonder, and there were many cries, and we could see cavalrymen scattered over the hills ahead of us. Cavalrymen were riding along the gulch and shooting into it, where there were women and children were running away and trying to hide in the gullies and stunted pines. A little way ahead of us, just below the head of the dry gulch, there were some women and children who were huddled under a clay bank, and some cavalrymen pointing guns at them. We stopped back behind the ridge, and I said to the others, Take courage. These are our relatives. We will try to get them back. Then we all sang a song, which went like this. A thunder-being nation I am, I have said. A thunder-being nation I am, I have said. You shall live, you shall live, you shall live, you shall live. Then I rode over the ridge, and the others after me, and we were crying, Take courage, it is time to fight. The soldiers who were guarding our relatives shot at us, and then ran away fast, and some more cavalrymen on the other side of the gulch did too. We got our relatives and sent them across the ridge to the northwest where they would be safe. I had no gun, and when we were charging, I just held the sacred bow out in front of me with my right hand. The bullets did not hit us at all. We found a little baby lying all alone near the head of the gulch. I could not pick her up just then, but I got her later, and some of my people adopted her. I just wrapped her up tighter in a shawl that was around her and left her there. It was a safe place, and I had other work to do. The soldiers had run eastward over the hills where there were many more soldiers, and they were off their horses and lying down. I told the others to stay back, and I charged upon them, holding the sacred bow out toward them with my right hand. They all shot at me, and I could hear bullets all around me, but I ran my horse right close to them and then swung around. Some soldiers across the gulch began shooting at me too, but I got back to the others and was not hurt at all. By now, many Lakotas who had heard the shooting were coming up from Pine Ridge, and we all charged on the soldiers. They ran eastward toward where the trouble began. We followed along the dry gulch, and what we saw was terrible. Dead and wounded women and children and little babies were scattered all along there where they had been trying to run away. The soldiers had followed them along the gulch as they ran and murdered them in there. Sometimes they were in heaps because they had huddled together, and some were scattered all along. Sometimes bunches of them had been killed and torn to pieces where the wagon guns hit them. I saw a little baby trying to suck its mother, but she was bloody and dead. There were 2 little boys at one place in this gulch. They had guns, and they had been killing soldiers all by themselves. We could see the soldiers they had killed. The boys were all alone there, and they were not hurt. These were brave little boys. When we drove the soldiers back, they dug themselves in, and we were not enough people to drive them out from there. In the evening, they marched off up Wounded Creek, and then we saw all that they had done there. Men and women and children were heaped and scattered all over the flat at the bottom of the little hill where the soldiers had their wagon guns, and westward up the dry gulch all the way to the high ridge. The dead women and children and babies were scattered. When I saw this, I wished that I had died too, but I was not sorry for women and children. It was better for them to be happy in the other world, and I wanted to be there too. Before I went there, I wanted to have revenge. I thought there might be a day, and we should have revenge. After the soldiers marched away, I heard from my friend Dog Chief how the trouble started, and he was right there by Yellowbird when it happened. This is the way it was. In the morning, the soldiers began to take all the guns away from the Bigfoots, who were camped in the flat below the little hill where the monument and burying ground are now. The people had stacked most of their guns and even their knives by the teepee where Bigfoot was lying sick. Soldiers were on the little hill and all around, and there were soldiers across the dry gulch to the south and over east along Wounded Knee Creek too. The people were nearly surrounded, and the wagon guns were pointing at them. Some had not yet given up their guns, and so the soldiers were searching all the teepees, throwing things around and poking into everything. There was a man called Yellowbird, and he and another man were standing in front of the teepee where Bigfoot was lying sick. They had white sheets around and over him with eye holes to look through, and they had guns under these. An officer came to search them. He took the other man's guns and then started to take Yellowbird's, but Yellowbird wouldn't let go. He wrestled with the officer, and while they were wrestling, the gun went off and killed the officer. Wazichus and some others have said he meant to do this, but Dog Chief was standing right there, and he told me it was not so. As soon as the gun went off, Dog Chief told me an officer shot and killed Bigfoot, who was lying sick inside the teepee. Then, suddenly, nobody knew what was happening except the soldiers were all shooting, and the wagon guns began going off right in among the people. Many were shot down there. The children and women ran into the gulch and up west, dropping all the time, for the soldiers shot them as they ran. There were only about 100 warriors, and there were nearly 500 soldiers. The warriors rushed to where they had piled their guns and knives. They fought soldiers with only their hands until they got their guns. Dog Chief saw Yellowbird run into a teepee with his gun, and from there he killed soldiers until the teepee caught fire. Then he died full of bullets. It was a good winter day when all this happened. The sun was shining, but after the soldiers marched away from their dirty work, a heavy snow began to fall. The wind came up in the night. There was a big blizzard, and it grew very cold. The snow drifted deep in the crooked gulch, and it was one long grave of butchered women and children and babies who had never done any harm and were only trying to run away.